Okay, devotees, welcome to our second day of Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2. Yes, so we started yesterday, the second canto, first chapter, the first step in God realization. And we did 9 verses, completely. We're in the third section, which is from verse 8, I think, or 9, verse 8. From verse 8 to verse 21, Shukadev begins answering Parikshit's questions. And today we're starting with verse 10. Okay, and so this is Shukadev Goswami, of course. Let's begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastichadeshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchkalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. All right, so verse 10, and it's Shukadev Goswami speaking, and he is really getting into answering the questions of Maharaj Parikshit. Right, so verse 10, that very Srimad Bhagavatam I shall recite before you, because you are the most sincere devotee of Lord Krishna, one who gives full attention and respect to hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, achieves unflinching faith in the Supreme Lord, the giver of salvation. Well, that's quite a verse, isn't it? My gosh, that's quite a verse. Yes, so we really got to give full attention and respect to the Bhagavatam. And it will revolutionize our lives visibly. Yeah, because our faith will strengthen and our understandings will deepen like that. All right, so let's go into the purport. There's a fairly substantial purport. So, Srila Prabhupada points out, first of all, that Vedic knowledge is received in the descending process, technically Avaroha Panta. Avaroha Panta. Yes, descending means that people who are higher than you, they hand it down to you. People who are more experienced, people who are authorities already, they hand it down to you. In this way, you can become authoritative. And that's distinct, of course. Yes, that's distinct from the ascending process, where obviously you don't know anything to start off with, so you just speculate and experiment and all that sort of thing. And, every now and then you discover something which is correct amidst many, mistaken ideas, which when you try them out, they don't work. Right. So, particularly, Srila Prabhupada points out that the descending process particularly involves depending on the mercy of the spiritual master. And Krishna, of course, and the acharyas, but particularly the mercy of the spiritual master. If the spiritual master is satisfied, then he'll give knowledge, like directly, explain certain things to you. And Krishna within the heart, when he sees that you have that right attitude, he'll just reveal things to you through the heart. So, yeah. So it's not a magical process. You know, there's the example given, Prabhupada sort of alludes to it a little here, that there was one so-called spiritual master. He had his faithful or main disciple, and so he wanted to transmit his knowledge to him. So as I recall, he put his hands on the disciple's head and said, "There you go, just take it all." And the disciple got something like an electric shock and got knocked out. And when he came to, the spiritual master was crying and just sort of, not looking good. And he said, "Yeah, well, I've given everything to you now. Now I've lost everything because I gave it to you." So it's not like that. So therefore, both spiritual master and disciple must be bona fide. And the disciples must have that unflinching faith, as Prabhupada mentioned in the beginning of the purport. Yeah. Unflinching faith that becoming a devotee will make everything complete. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kahe, Sudrida Nishchoy, Krishna Bhakti Kaile Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Chaitanya Charitamrita says that faith, Shraddha Shabde, this word faith, means to have complete faith, trust, acceptance, that simply by becoming Krishna conscious, all goals, and including other goals, and what to speak of Krishna conscious goals, but all goals, including all other goals, will be achieved. Right. So, of course, this is all explained in Bhagavad Gita about accepting a spiritual master. And Prabhupada makes the point that if you leave your body in such a condition, then you'll achieve salvation, as Maharaj Parikshit did. But professional reciters, pseudo-devotees, they may talk about Bhagavatam in this way or that, but it's completely different. And the result is just not good. Just the result will simply be confusion. So, yes, there's an interesting point at the end of the first paragraph, is that well, just a sec. In the verse, in the second line of the Sanskrit, Krishna is addressed as Mahapurusha, Mahapurushika, Mahapurusha. And this term is used for him in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, that he appears, the Mahapurusha appears as Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya is, so therefore it's confirmation, Lord Chaitanya is Lord Krishna. So in that regard, two verses are quoted from the 11th canto, chapter 5, what being Mahapurusha means. Purusha means enjoyer. Mahapurusha means the supreme enjoyer. This is Krishna. This is Krishna. So the term Mahapurushika, Purushika, means ka generally indicates genitive, like of the Mahapurusha. So Prabhupada makes the point, one who deserves to approach the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna is called the Mahapurushika. Yes. Mahapurushika. Yeah. So anyone who studies Srimad Bhagavatam very nicely will become a sincere devotee, and such a devotee that he or she will be able to deliver others. Yes, they'll be able to deliver others. Following in the footsteps of Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami. Of course, not on their level exactly, but following in their footsteps nicely. So, Prabhupada goes on that chanting and hearing are two of the 9 processes. In fact, they're the first 2. And if one does them, Srila Prabhupada says strenuously, either in all or by parts, one can attain the absolute plane. And then Prabhupada refers to Prabhupada says from the first line of the first verse up to the last line of the last verse in the 12th canto, first verse in first canto, everything was spoken by Shukadev for the salvation of Maharaj Parikshit. But then Prabhupada refers to Padma Purana. Ambarish is advised. Ambarish Maharaj, very famous devotee, advised by Gautama Muni to hear Srimad Bhagavatam regularly as it was recited by Sukadev. And so therefore it's confirmed that Ambarish heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from beginning to end. So we shouldn't just take bits and pieces from here and there in the Bhagavatam, but hear the whole thing following in the footsteps of Ambarish Maharaj and Maharaj Parikshit from the representative of Shukadev. Okay, so on to verse 11. O King, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, including those who are free from all material desires, those who are desirous of all material enjoyment, and also those who are self-satisfied by dint of transcendental knowledge. You know, this is a very important verse, pointing out the essential nature of chanting. And we must understand, here's one important point for you, which I think is not mentioned specifically by Prabhupada here, but elsewhere, is that Srimad Bhagavatam is not just for Kali Yuga. Srimad Bhagavatam is eternal. And it just so happens that Shukadev spoke, or Shukadev got it from Vyas, who got it from Narada, and it was Kali Yuga, but it's eternal. So whatever's stated generally applies just at any time. Yeah. So therefore we can understand that ultimately the practice of chanting of the holy names is emphasized for all yugas. Okay, so anyway, let's look at the purport, and it's a pretty substantial purport because it's significant verse. So Prabhupada talks about three types of people with three types of goals. Materialists want sense gratification. Transcendentalists are aloof and they're self-satisfied. Then there's the devotees, and their goal is to please the Lord. So therefore, if the Lord wants, the devotees can accept all material facilities. But if not, they can just leave everything, including liberation. And they're not self-satisfied either. I mean, they're generally very satisfied, but that's because they're satisfying the Lord. And they want to satisfy the Lord. So by His mercy, they share in His satisfaction. So it's not just some self-bliss, like the impersonalists are trying for. So this chanting, though, it has to be done offenselessly. You have to receive the holy names from authorities, first thing. And then you hear, by chanting and hearing nicely, will bring you to the point of hearing about the form, the pastimes, successively of the Lord. So it's even recommended for materialists. Yeah, anyone. It is, as Shukadev says, constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord after the ways of the great authorities is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all, for everyone. So, then we move on to the second paragraph and the rest, because there's a number of paragraphs further, because what happens now, it's such a foundational verse that Srila Prabhupada really gets into explaining about how to chant, what to avoid when you're trying to chant like that, which is basically the 10 offenses. First of all, to vilify the devotees. Second, the way Prabhupada describes them here, see holy names in terms of worldly distinctions. Third is to neglect the orders of the acharyas. Fourth is to vilify the scriptures. Fifth is, Prabhupada says, to define the holy name by mundane calculation. 6 is to interpret the holy name. 7 is to commit sins intentionally on the strength of the name. 8th is to consider chanting equal to material auspicious activity. 9 is to instruct those who are not interested. And 10 is to become uninterested even after hearing of the transcendental nature of the holy names. Plus, of course, it's an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Okay, so we go on now to verse 12. What is the value of a prolonged life which is wasted, inexperienced by years in this world? Better a moment of full consciousness, because that gives one a start in searching after his supreme interest. So that's really nice, isn't it? Yeah, that's really nice. What's the point of a long life like, I don't know if Prabhupada, I don't think he mentions it here necessarily. Oh, he does. at the end of the purport. Some trees live for hundreds of years, and even more than hundreds. Some animals, I believe the tortoise, did you hear that? The tortoise lives for more than 100 years, something like that. But what's the use of a long life like a tree? Maybe even be, from what I hear, 1,000 years in some cases. What's the point? Or the tortoise. What's the point? There's no point. Better just a moment of full consciousness. The word, just interestingly enough, for a moment is muhurta. And you may know muhurta is like a Vedic period of time. And it's not just a second or something like that. Muhurta is 48 minutes. So better to get just even once for 48 minutes a dose of Krishna consciousness. So anyway, Prabhupada goes on. Shukadev's encouraging Maharaj Parikshit, who's going to die in 7 days. So he doesn't have the time to really, work on things in depth for years. So better just 7 days of full consciousness in the case of Parikshit, or even just 48 minutes. So otherwise we shouldn't waste our lives, eat, drink, and be merry. We have to develop spiritually. And Srila Prabhupada, referring to Srila Jiva Goswami, discusses further about the chanting of the holy names. Certain of the offenses. The first offense, Prabhupada talks about further what to do if you hear people blaspheming. Prabhupada refers to Jiva Goswami, who says, first of all, cut out his tongue. If you can't do that, commit suicide. In other words, definitely you shouldn't hear or allow vilification of a devotee. Then the third offense, distinguishing the Lord's names from the demigods. Prabhupada talks about that. Yes, understand the demigods are not equal to the Lord, and the holy name is the Lord. So if you say the names of demigods are equal to the names of the Lord, or greater than, you're saying the demigods are equal to or greater than the Lord, actually. And we shouldn't commit sinful activity on the strength of chanting the holy names. That's the seventh offense. He talks about that also. Yes. So we must chant without offenses. Yeah. Even it's better just a brief period of time. Well, if you commit the seventh offense, you'll never be excused. Prabhupada says, referring to Jiva Goswami. Yeah. And that's better than living for thousands of years like a tree and whatever other living entities live for very long periods of time. I read, some months ago, about some, not exactly a tree, sort of like a tree, but it spreads out and spreads out and spreads out. And the people said it had been living for, I don't know how many thousands of years, but really many thousands of years. And I also read, I think at the same time, they were saying that one part of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, just off the shore of Queensland, that one part of it is one piece of coral, because coral's alive. And it's been alive for I forget how long, but really an extremely long period of time. So, okay, let's move on to verse 13. The saintly king, Khatvanga, after being informed that the duration of his life would be only a moment more, at once freed himself from all material activities and took shelter of the supreme safety, the personality of Godhead. You know, he's most particularly described in the 9th canto, actually, Khatvanga. So yeah, Khatvanga, in the purport of 13, there's a description of Khatvanga. It's taken from the 9th canto. He was a very saintly king, but big warrior also. And the demigods had to fight with the demons. They needed help, so they called on him. And he went and he fought against the demons. And he was basically, his fighting was responsible for the demons being defeated. So the demigods were very grateful, and they said, what we want, you know, you've helped us so much. What can we do for you? And he thought momentarily and said, can you tell me when I'm going to die? Because he was a devotee, great devotee. And he wanted to ready himself. So they had a little meeting, the demigods, and of course they have supernatural powers. They came back and said, you know what? You're going to die in 1 minute. So he just focused his mind on Krishna and went back to Godhead. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, by the will of the Lord, Maharaj Parikshit instantly met the great Shukadev Goswami, and thus the great treasure of spiritual success left by him is nicely mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Verse 14. Maharaj Parikshit, now your duration of life is limited to 7 more days. So during this time you can perform all those rituals which are needed for the best purpose of your next life. So Srila Prabhupada gives a shortish purport. So Shukadev Goswami, having mentioned Khatvanga in verse 13, encourages Parikshit that just as Khatvanga prepared himself in a very short time, so you also, you have 7 days, and it's enough time. Khatvanga had less time, actually. So you can easily prepare yourself adequately for going back to Godhead. So indirectly he's saying that you should take shelter of the sound form of the Lord for 7 days. Yes. So everyone can do like this simply by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Verse 15. At the last stage of one's life, one should be bold enough not to be afraid of death, but one must cut off all attachment to the material body and everything pertaining to it and all desires thereof. You know, this is a very important part of Krishna consciousness. We got to become attached to Krishna. Of course, that's the main thing. But Prabhupada taught repeatedly and repeatedly, we've also got to develop detachment from the material world by understanding and by purification. Yes. So anyway, Prabhupada in the purports explains how fools think they can make a permanent situation here, but they always have to give it all up. Some think there's nothing after death. Even so-called learned people, they think like that. So these sorts of stupid ideas, Prabhupada says, they're killing the vitality of human life because they don't care about the next life. Yeah, well, they think there is no next life to care about. So they just sort of live for today. Yeah. And when they're too worn out to live for today, they just fizzle out and watch television and watch other people living for the day. So yeah, Prabhupada explains some basic things about reincarnation, etc. Change of bodies like change of clothes. Must make sure your next body's as good as possible. So just like clothes, maybe you get some new clothes and they're nice clothes you got from some nice shop, or at least you get nice clean clothes and they're really nice. And you make sure of that the day before, that the next day you'll have nice clothes. And Prabhupada says, death is like sleeping. Death is like sleeping. You forget everything about the body and bodily relations. I slept last night. Can't remember a thing. And while I was sleeping, I didn't know who I was, where I was, or these types of things. So death is like sleeping for a few months. Yeah, we need to be trained in the meantime. And Prabhupada says the training can begin even a few seconds before death. Yeah. But usually there's a process of going through the ashrams from childhood. But whenever you get Krishna consciousness, whether it's in your youth or old age, get into it and make the most of it. Yeah. Vanaprastha and sannyas stages are specifically for preparing for the next life. But again, Prabhupada makes the point that the foolish leaders stick to the family stage. Grihastha ashram forever. Yeah, that's it. Best, Prabhupada makes the point, best to give up family life, take to devotional service. So the bottom line is that our desires must be changed, and we must cultivate the desire to be Krishna conscious, and particularly Prabhupada says here, the desire to go back to Godhead. If we cultivate that desire, those desires, then other desires will diminish. So Prabhupada talks about how all living entities have a service propensity, some sort of service attitude, but it's usually directed to their family or their nation or their boss, their work, or, whatever it may be, but not the Lord. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the perfection of such a service attitude is only attained simply by transferring the desire of service from matter to spirit, or from Satan to God. Yes. Verse 16. One should leave home and practice self-control in a sacred place He should bathe regularly and sit down in a lonely place duly sanctified. So again, Prabhupada's pursuing the point of getting out of family life. According to Varnashram Dharma, which is also known as Sanatan Dharma, it's prescribed. You have to get out at the age of 50 or earlier, Prabhupada says. Take it that the warning is there even before 50. So we must prepare. And the system of Sanatan Dharma or Krishna consciousness is such that the training is naturally there. Retired people can go to holy places, meet with devotees, get trained. It's very nice. Otherwise, you can't get free from attachments if you don't get trained. So, in other words, one shouldn't just go to a holy place and make another home and associate with women, etc., for sense gratification. You must, in that vanaprastha state, you must practice celibacy. Prabhupada says, if you remain attached to sex life, it is suicidal, Prabhupada says. For a man desiring to improve the condition of his existence, sex indulgence is considered suicidal, or even worse. Hare Krishna. So we need to sit nicely and chant without offense. Verse 17. After sitting in the above manner, make the mind remember the three transcendental letters A-U-M or Om, and by regulating the breathing process, control the mind so as not to forget the transcendental seed. So Prabhupada discusses the chanting of Om. It's interesting, normally in the Western world, and not just the Western world also, they spell it O-M and pronounce it Om. But actually, if you look at the Sanskrit word, you'll see it's A-U-M. Actually, it's A-U-N. It's the nasalized N. Yeah, it's not Om. Yeah, interesting. You've read that. Oh, you must read. Yeah, you'll see. It's A-U-M. Not like an N, but it's a nasalized M. Okay. So, right, Prabhupada discusses about Om, Om, like that. And he says, if you chant it in the mind, in conjunction with the breathing process, which is a transcendental but mechanical way of getting into trance, as devised by the experience of great mystics, then you can bring the mind under control. Yeah, but easier to just chant Hare Krishna from the outset. Yes. So the Omkar is Prabhupada says it's for people who cannot chant the holy names. It's a form of address, something like, "Oh my Lord." It can be seen like that, Prabhupada says. But it's for people who can't actually chant the holy names. Better to just chant the holy names. Fix your mind on the Lord directly, immediately. But if you can't do that, you can chant Om, Om, yeah. Verse 18, gradually as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. Okay. So here, a sort of mechanical process of becoming Krishna conscious step by step from the point of just in the beginning controlling your mind. This is being discussed. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying the first process of spiritualizing the mind by mechanical chanting of the pranava omkara and by control of the breathing system is technically called the mystic or yogic process of pranayam, or fully controlling the breathing air. But the ultimate stage, Prabhupada says, the ultimate stage of this pranayam system is to be fixed in trance, samadhi. But our experience, Prabhupada says, shows at this stage it may fail to control the mind. And the example is given of Vishvamitra Muni, who was in samadhi, but then he became attracted by Menaka and fell down. So this process may stop the mind for the time being, but the memories are still there in the subtle body and they'll come up. So therefore, Shukadev recommends that the next step, he says, Prabhupada says, the next step of assured policy, it definitely works, namely to fix one's mind in the service of the personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna. And he notes that Krishna advises this, recommends this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 47. So then you should, work on cleansing your mind and engage in devotional service by hearing and chanting simultaneously, actually. Yes. Right. So, and absorb yourself in hearing and chanting. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if performed under proper guidance, that is the surest path of progress, even for the disturbed mind. Means to fix your mind in devotional service, including and particularly hearing and chanting. Verse 19. Thereafter, you should meditate upon the limbs of Vishnu one after another, without being deviated from the conception of the complete body. Thus the mind becomes free from all sense objects. There should be no other thing to be thought upon. Because the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu is the ultimate truth, the mind becomes completely reconciled in him only. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying, foolish persons bewildered by the external energy of Vishnu do not know that the ultimate goal of the progressive search after happiness is to get in touch directly with Lord Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada goes through it here. Meditation on Vishnu and ultimately Krishna is the last word in meditation. And you start from the feet, but then gradually go up through the whole body. And this verse makes it clear, Prabhupada points out, that the absolute truth is not impersonal. Otherwise, meditating on the form of the Lord wouldn't have been recommended. So therefore, temples are not full of idols, but they're centers for meditating on different forms of the Lord. It's good to meditate on deities. If you're, for those who can't focus on Pranava Omkar, but even if you can focus on Pranava Omkar, it's best to focus your attention on deities. Yeah. So generally for people, it's better to meditate on the form of the Lord in temples than to chant Om. Ultimately, in one sense, there's no difference between meditating on the form of the Lord in temples and the Pranava Omkara. But people who don't understand the science of the Absolute, they differentiate between them. Anyway, here's Prabhupada's conclusion to the purport, in which he does seem to differentiate between them. Yeah. But, it's transcendental. Here it is indicated that the Vishnu form is the ultimate goal of meditation, and as such it is better to concentrate on the forms of Vishnu than on impersonal Omkar. The latter process is also more difficult than the former. Former is to meditate on the form of the Lord. The latter is to meditate on Om. Verse 20, one's mind is always agitated by the passionate mode of material nature and bewildered by the ignorant mode of nature. But one can rectify such conceptions by the relation of Vishnu and thus become pacified by cleansing the dirty things created by them. Them means the mode of passion, mode of ignorance. The purport. So Prabhupada makes the point in a very straightforward way. People in passion and ignorance and awe can't realize God, only those in goodness. Because if you're affected by passion and ignorance, you'll have too much attachment for wealth and women. Hare Krishna. But such people, even people in passion and ignorance, can be rectified if they're trained in remembering the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yes. Right. Impersonalists are generally influenced by passion and ignorance. They think they're liberated, but they don't actually know of the personal feature of the Lord. And such people who, they're in rajas and tamas, so they're very attached to wealth and women, but they're being trained to remember Lord Vishnu. In actually what he's getting at is in the universal form, ultimately. Then gradually, Prabhupada notes here in Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says that after hundreds of births, such people may surrender to him. In the meantime, Prabhupada says, interesting, they can progress by the philosophy of pantheism. Amazing. Or meditating on the universal form. So there's a second paragraph here, in which Prabhupada points out that pantheism on a higher level is not impersonal, but extends, Prabhupada says, extends the conception of the absolute truth into the field of the so-called material energy. So you know what that means. focusing on the universal form. Yeah. And then by service, you can dovetail everything in the service of the Lord in relation with the Absolute. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the pure devotee of the Lord knows the art of converting everything into its spiritual existence by the service attitude, and only in that devotional way can the theory of pantheism be perfected. Yeah, so, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? If we take, if we're not so advanced, but if we take shelter of someone who is advanced, then even by meditating on the universal form or just learning how to connect things to Krishna directly or indirectly, we will make progress. Yes. Oh, what happened? All right. So let's have a look here. Let us have a look. There's a little mistake in my notes. Just let me alter it. There we go. So, Prabhupada explains, mystical performances are only successful with the help of devotional service. Yeah. Pantheism, the system of feeling the presence of the Almighty everywhere. It's a sort of training for the mind, the not advanced at all mind, to become accustomed to the devotional conception. Yeah. And therefore, even these people who are pantheists and mystics, they can actually progress and become devotees. But you can't reach that stage without at least some tinge of devotional service. So pantheism, Prabhupada says, creates a devotional atmosphere, understanding the Absolute is everywhere. He's in the water, he's in the sky, he's in the fields, he's everywhere. It creates a devotional atmosphere which develops into devotional service. And that is the only benefit for the impersonalist. And Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita chapter 12, verse 5, which confirms that the impersonal path is troublesome because it's indirect. But that, if all goes well, the impersonalist becomes obsessed with the personal feature of the Lord much later. So devotees, we go on now. That's the end of that section. Then in verse 22, the next verse, Maharaj Parikshit inquires further. He's already inquired, now he's going to make a further inquiry just at this stage in one verse. Of course, as we go through the Bhagavatam, he makes many inquiries. But here's one so it's kind of separate from, what Shukadev Goswami has been saying and what he's going to be saying. So we're looking at it as a section in itself. Parikshit inquires further. So the translation, the fortunate King Parikshit inquiring further said, O Brahman, please describe in full detail how and where the mind has to be applied and how the conception can be fixed so that the dirty things in a person's mind can be removed. Yeah. So there's substantial purport. Prabhupada says these dirty things in our hearts are the root cause of all our problems. And therefore we're surrounded by so many problems. But there's a real shortage or absence of real solutions, like real solutions. Yeah. You need Krishna consciousness. So therefore, because of these dirty things, material desires, the conditioned soul won't serve Krishna, but serves his own concocted desires. And these things can only be removed by associating with the Lord in the process of Krishna consciousness. Then, and this is the subject ultimately here coming up, if you can't do that, if you can't just get into accepting the personal form of the Lord like the deity, chanting the holy names, serving the Lord like that, then Prabhupada says, then the universal form, Virat Rupa, can be associated with. And it is the feature of his potencies, which are non-different from him, non-different and different. Achintya Bhed, Abhed Tattva. So in this way they associate with him, although it's indirectly. So the second paragraph, Maharaj Parikshit is already a personalist. He's not like impersonally tinged. He has to go through some pantheistic process or chanting of Om. No, he's ready to get into Krishna consciousness as it is, hearing and chanting deity worship, etc. So he doesn't need to inquire about the Virat Rupa, but he's doing so simply to benefit those who are spiritualists, or maybe even not quite spiritualists, but they're not personalists yet, who can really engage in devotional service. Sometimes Prabhupada says they feel revolted by the personal form. They're ignorant of his inconceivable potencies. They don't understand he can move in human society, but still be the same omnipotent personality of Godhead. Yeah. Moving in an apparently human form, in human society, but he's not deviated from his transcendental position. So there you go, devotees. The next section is Shukadev describes the universal form. And it starts with the next verse, verse 23. So we'll really get into that tomorrow. Hare Krishna devotees, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.